The space city of New Appalachia was so named by its inhabitants. Forces on Earth coincided to make the Appalachian peoples migrate just as Beam Acceleration Drive 1 was finished being built. 500,000 of them were selected as colonists. Of the 5 million applicants, nearly half were from the Appalachian region, and luck had left them healthy. Living in the background, deep in the hills, the biowars had ravaged other populations. The Appalachians were effectively already sheltering in place. Not that they thought of it that way, they were just living as they always had, coming into town once a year for supplies, trading shine and furs to pay their taxes and for those few bits of machinery that made their lives easier. They'd fade back into the mountains. Bad 1 was a 20-year project built on the heels of the largest project in Earth's history. It existed because of the PIP, and the PIP existed because it was needed to build the Obama. Trillions of dollars were spent. The money was printed, causing inflation, but also jump-starting the pumping iron project under the pretense of protecting the Earth's climate with the big-ass orbital mirror array. The price of building materials delivered to orbit was down to $20 a pound in uninflated 2020 dollars, and with the Earth climate stabilized, the PIP moved mass to produce Bad 1. The idea was simple. A 40-mile-long engine that accelerated ionized atoms. Each atom was accelerated to near-light speed, which happened in the first mile, called the injector, and then added a billion electron-volt kick to the ass of that. Each atom came out the back with an effective mass of a grain of sand and the energy of a thrown brick, and they streamed out at the frequency of microwave radiation. The journey from Earth's Lagrange point 1 to Mars took 6 weeks, or 4 weeks, depending upon the Mars position of the sky. Fuel, acceleration, and deceleration combined was a mere 18 tons of iron. There are river barges that carry 400 tons of iron. The whole thing was powered by 1,000 square miles of solar panels mounted on paddle-shaped fins extending from the long engine housing. They could each turn independently to face the sun. While some of the panels would pass into the shadow part of the time, most were quietly delivering energy to the engine. As the ship rotated along its axis, the paddles adjusted their position to point at the sun, like the leaves of a giant plant. And then there was the flower at the head of the stem. 2 cylindrical habitats, each one a mile across and 10 miles long, and rotating opposite like giant printing drums. Oh, there were some technical support structures, but the important bit was 60 square miles of space city, twice 10 miles of fertile ground, complete with the centripetal gravity built in to keep boots and water on the ground. Heck, it even kept the ground on the ground. All that area was for farming. Well, there were some raised towers for lighting and entrances allowing the decks below for workers and farm equipment, but the primary purpose was food production for the millions of workers being transported to their new home. All the apartments were below farming decks. All the mess halls, all the storage areas, the waterworks, the electronics, the temperature control, everything was below the farm layer. The 2 cities were bound together for mutual stability, much as modern space cities. They were designated Drum A and Drum B. It was mutually agreed by the inhabitants that the Appalachians didn't much like the other inhabitants, and the other inhabitants didn't much like the Appalachians. That's putting it mildly. There were fights, puts it a little less mildly, but does not express the intensity of the mutual dislike. The upshot was that the population self-divided into the 2 cities. The Appalachian component inhabited Drum A, and everyone else inhabited Drum B. They became known as New Appalachia and New Boston. As long as the inhabitants didn't grind shoulders, or fists, with each other on a daily basis, there was peace. Once in orbit around Mars, the joined pair of habitats was released from the Bad 1, and complete with their own solar sails and solar power collectors. 1,000,000 men ready to dismantle moons to become the stairway down to Mars that would bring about the next age of man, the grunts and the heroes of the future. Everything was going according to plan. Bad 1, with a ship's crew of 1,000, was one day out, heading back to Earth, or more exactly to one of Earth's Lagrange points, when the disaster happened. Habitat B blew a hole. It was never clear whether it was sabotage, mechanical failure, or a random impact with a chunk of space rock traveling 30,000 miles per hour. A hole opened at one end of New Boston, and the outgoing air tore the hole larger, removing thus any evidence of how the original hole had been made. In the next 10 minutes, 499,000 men died. 1,000 men made it to the lockers and donned spacesuits. Half of those, though they got into suits, were already damaged, coughing up blood inside their helmets. These died in the following hours. The men of New Appalachia suited up and brought the survivors back to their city. There was no friction, only sadness. New Boston was repaired, and the city drifted or sailed on the solar wind into its position 30 miles off Phobos. A year later, when Bad 1 came back, sporting a new pair of cities, no one wanted to join the cities of New Appalachia, as both sides of the station were now equally inhabited. The second pair of cities, New California and New Denver, took over the miting of Deimos, and there was only limited trade between the two city pairs. Over the next decades, the wives came, and the population grew. Many went down to Mars to become miners and moisture farmers. They remained fiercely independent. The old stereotypes are quite apt. The citizens of New Appalachia still don't like strangers, and they make the best shine.